Tonight, we begin with a whisper from the stars, a signal, faint and irregular, intercepted long before humanity ventured into orbit. The year was 1899. Nikola Tesla, conducting experiments with his high-voltage radio equipment in Colorado Springs, claimed to have received a signal from space unlike anything known to man. A rhythmic pattern, a pulse, not lightning, not earthly interference, something deliberate. He believed it was extraterrestrial in origin. Others, at the time, dismissed it as impossible. Yet Tesla's report would be the first thread in a mystery that continues to this day, a mystery known as the Black Knight satellite. The legend is simple and terrifying in implication. An unidentified object orbiting Earth for at least 13,000 years. Not built by us, not natural, silent, watching, and seemingly active. For over a century, this anomaly has reappeared in military reports, NASA photographs, intercepted radio signals, and amateur observations. Its orbit does not match any known trajectory. Its presence is not registered in official satellite logs, and yet it is seen. This story winds through time, beginning with Tesla, then moving to the 1920s when Norwegian engineer Jørgen Hals detected long-delayed radio echoes, signals bouncing back several seconds after transmission, as if reflecting off something orbiting. These echoes couldn't be explained by Earth's atmosphere or any known celestial body. They seemed to come from nowhere, or worse, somewhere specific, somewhere deliberately listening. In 1954, decades before any man-made object could achieve long-term orbit, the U.S. Air Force publicly acknowledged the existence of two satellites orbiting Earth, though neither had been launched by the U.S. or the Soviet Union. This statement, published in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, was quickly walked back. Official sources claimed it was a misunderstanding, but for some, it was the first crack in a larger truth. Then, in 1960, a strange object was detected in polar orbit, something no nation was capable of at the time. It moved against the direction of Earth's rotation, a feat requiring massive energy. It wasn't one of ours, nor was it debris. Photographs were taken. The object was black, oddly shaped, and tumbling slowly. It was dubbed the Black Knight. Over the years, NASA provided alternate explanations. It was thermal insulation, space debris, a misidentified satellite. Yet none of these fit the entire timeline or the recurring signals. In this investigation, we'll examine the evidence behind the myth, the strange signals recorded, the images captured, the theories proposed, from alien probes to ancient artifacts, from Cold War psyops to interstellar beacons. We begin not with a conspiracy, but with a question. What is the object orbiting silently above us, and why has it never left? And as we drift deeper into the story, we'll listen carefully, because long before we watched the skies, something may have been watching us.
It began with static, the crackle of electricity in the dry Colorado air, the pop and hiss of arc discharges, and then something else. Nikola Tesla's laboratory, perched on the open plains near Pikes Peak, was no stranger to strange sounds. But in the winter of 1899, the great inventor documented a signal that didn't belong. Tesla had constructed a massive radio receiver, tuned to the frequencies of natural phenomena, lightning, solar storms, even the Earth's resonance. But on one particular evening, he recorded a series of rhythmic beeps, not Morse code, not weather interference, a structure that suggested intention. He wrote, "Although I could not decipher their meaning, it was impossible for me to think of them as having been entirely accidental. The feeling is constantly growing on me that I had been the first to hear the greeting of one planet to another." The scientific community of the time disregarded his claim. Tesla's reputation was already teetering on the edge of eccentricity. But he would go to his grave insisting he had intercepted a message not from Earth, but from space. In the years that followed, others began to hear strange echoes. In the 1920s, radio engineers across Europe began to experience something new: transmissions that bounced back seconds after being sent. Jørgen Hals, a Norwegian radio operator, was the first to formally record the phenomenon. He noted that signals sent from Earth would return after delays far longer than normal atmospheric reflections. Known as long-delayed echoes, or LDEs, these signals were mysterious and erratic, sometimes a second later, sometimes 10, and no one could determine what was causing them. Various theories were proposed: unusual ionospheric conditions, reflections off the moon, or even internal faults in equipment. But nothing fully explained the consistency of the delays or their patterns. Then came the idea that these echoes might be bouncing off something else, something in orbit, a stationary, reflective surface, something large enough to intercept and return transmissions, a satellite. But this was decades before Sputnik, before any nation had the means to place an object into stable orbit. If there was something up there, it had not been put there by us. Theorists began to connect the dots: Tesla's mysterious signal, the LDEs of the 1920s, the Air Force's strange satellite claims in 1954. A timeline emerged, unbroken and unsettling. Could it be that an artificial object, unknown to all earthly authorities, had been circling our planet since before we could see it? A silent sentinel, a watcher. In 1973, Scottish writer Duncan Lunan revisited the long-delayed echo phenomenon and proposed a radical idea. By plotting the delay times on a graph, he believed he uncovered a message, a star map. It pointed to Epsilon Boötis, a binary star system 200 light-years away. According to Lunan, the message read, "Start here. Our home is Epsilon Boötis." Mainstream science dismissed the interpretation. The data was too sparse, too open to coincidence. But the seed was planted. A satellite, not from Earth, broadcasting a stellar origin. Was the Black Knight simply debris, misidentified and misunderstood? Or was it something far older and far more deliberate? A device placed here long before humans built cities, patiently listening and sometimes answering, waiting to be noticed again.
By the 1950s, the world had entered the Cold War. Radar installations scanned the skies not for mystery, but for missiles. Surveillance was paramount. Anything that moved overhead, anything that didn't belong, became a matter of national security. In 1954, the United States Air Force made an unusual announcement. According to aviation writers Donald Keyhoe and Leonard Cramp, military sources confirmed that 2 unidentified satellites had been detected in Earth's orbit. But this was 3 years before the Soviet Union would launch Sputnik. At the time, no country possessed the technology to place artificial satellites in space. Newspapers ran the story. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch published a piece titled "Artificial Satellites Are Circling Earth, Say Air Force Scientists." But no details followed. The statement was retracted, and the story quietly disappeared. Some researchers believe these early sightings were the first official acknowledgement of the Black Knight. In 1960, the U.S. Navy's Dark Fence radar system, a secretive network designed to detect incoming missiles and satellites, picked up something peculiar: an object in a polar orbit, traveling from pole to pole at a trajectory unmatched by any satellite then in existence. The object was dark, slow tumbling, and appeared to be massive. Suspicion immediately fell on the Soviets. But the Soviet Union had not yet mastered polar orbit capabilities. Neither had the United States. Photographs were taken. The object was irregular in shape, pitch black, and eerily angular. Analysts couldn't match it to any known satellite. NASA initially declined to comment, then attributed the object to the discarded casing of a Discoverer satellite, a claim that didn't withstand scrutiny. To this day, the 1960 sighting remains one of the most compelling pieces of visual evidence in the Black Knight narrative.
The photographs were later declassified, and amateur analysts would spend decades attempting to analyze them. Then came 1998. The Space Shuttle Endeavour on mission STS-88 captured images of a strange object while assembling parts of the International Space Station. The object appeared once again, black, irregular, seemingly floating on its own axis. The images were released publicly by NASA. Almost immediately, enthusiasts began identifying it as the Black Knight. NASA claimed it was a thermal blanket, lost during a spacewalk. Indeed, insulation blankets had been known to float in orbit. But skeptics pointed out the blanket theory did not account for the early sightings, nor did it explain the object's repeated reappearances over multiple decades. This was not a single incident, it was a pattern. And that pattern always seemed to align with moments of technological advancement. Tesla's wireless experiments, early radio transmissions, the rise of radar, the dawn of the space age. Each time humanity took a step toward the stars, the shadow reappeared. And each time explanations followed, convenient, partial, and unsatisfying. Was this a case of misidentified debris layered with decades of speculation? Or were these incidents proof of a technology far older than ours, deliberately veiled in ambiguity? Something that watches from the dark, but never speaks, unless we get too close.
Among the many unusual traits attributed to the Black Knight satellite, one stands apart: the object's orbit. Unlike the eastward equatorial orbits favored by human-launched satellites, the Black Knight has repeatedly been described as moving in a polar orbit. This path takes it over the Earth's poles, from north to south, allowing it to scan the entire surface of the planet as the Earth rotates beneath it. In 1960, when the object was first officially tracked in such an orbit, the implications were clear. Neither the United States nor the Soviet Union had successfully placed satellites in a true polar orbit at that time. The energy requirements were far greater, and the launch precision needed was immense. Yet something was there. This orbit would make perfect sense, not for communications or weather monitoring, but for surveillance. A polar orbit is the optimal vantage point for global observation. Military satellites now use such paths for reconnaissance, but the Black Knight, if reports are to be believed, was using this trajectory decades before such missions were even imagined. Some theorists suggest this is no coincidence. They propose the object was designed for long-term planetary observation, an eye in the sky that watches the whole of Earth, not just one region. Adding weight to this theory are the patterns of its appearances. Reports of the satellite often cluster around major geopolitical events or technological breakthroughs. During the Cold War, sightings were particularly frequent. Amateur astronomers tracked odd reflections in the night sky, objects that moved with unnatural timing or altered orbits without clear propulsion. In 1973, intelligence analysts at the CIA began archiving anomalous satellite reports under classified programs. While most entries pertain to Soviet surveillance equipment, a few redacted documents speak of unidentified orbital signatures not matching any known platform. Most are stamped with unresolved. To the intelligence community, the Black Knight was more than myth. It was a data point, an outlier they couldn't explain. In recent years, some defense experts have speculated about the possibility of non-nation-state actors deploying unknown objects in orbit, perhaps secret probes from breakaway civilizations or advanced aerospace black projects. But these ideas remain fringe, buried in obscure think tank reports and declassified briefings missing their conclusions. One NASA contractor, speaking anonymously in a 2008 interview, mentioned that many low-orbit anomalies are logged and dismissed because they do not persist long enough to be considered threats. "There are things up there we don't talk about," he said. "They blink in and out. You don't chase shadows." But this shadow seems to return. Photographs surface, signals reappear. Each time, explanations follow. Burned insulation, photographic error, overzealous imaginations.
yet the orbital pattern remains consistent. Something moves over the poles, dark and slow. Whether it is a relic of a forgotten civilization, an alien watcher, or merely the projection of human fears into the unknown, it watches. It always watches.
While the visual mystery of the Black Night remains unsettling, the signals it allegedly emits are what first drew scientific attention and perhaps what set the conspiracy in motion. From Tesla's earliest experiments to strange echoes heard by radio operators decades later, the auditory aspect of the legend is often overlooked. Long-delayed echoes, or LDEs, are rare radio phenomena where a transmitted signal returns to the sender after a delay of seconds, far longer than the normal reflections caused by Earth's atmosphere. These anomalies were first recorded in the 1920s, but they remain largely unexplained even today. Theories abound, bouncing off distant celestial bodies, propagation through unknown layers of the ionosphere, even unknown plasma fields. But in every case, the mystery remains. Why only sometimes, and why the same delay intervals repeated over decades? In the 1970s, Duncan Lunan attempted a radical interpretation. He plotted the LDEs on a graph and found what he believed was a star map, a message encoded in delay times. The message, if accurate, claimed to originate from a planet orbiting Epsilon Boötis, a star system 200 light-years away. Though his findings were never accepted by mainstream astronomy, the idea struck a nerve. What if these delays were not errors, but attempts at contact? Or worse, what if they weren't messages meant for us at all, but rather part of an ongoing communication we had accidentally intercepted? In the 1990s, amateur radio enthusiasts began picking up unexplained UHF and VHF signals during clear nights. Some claims to hear repeating beeps and odd Morse-like pulses, signals not traceable to known satellites or ground stations. These anomalies often coincided with visual sightings of tumbling, unregistered objects in low Earth orbit. One such case, known as the Kiev incident of 1998, involved a Ukrainian satellite tracking station picking up what they called a non-human pattern broadcast in binary. The signal lasted only 23 seconds. The technicians recorded it, but the original tape vanished after being requisitioned by government officials. All that remains is a transcript, a string of zeros and ones that defies clear decoding. NASA, when questioned about such anomalies, routinely attributes them to stray emissions, overlapping frequencies, or misinterpretations. And in many cases, these may be correct. Space is noisy, equipment is flawed, confirmation bias is real. But it is also true that some signals have known source, and those signals have a pattern, a soft pulse in the silence. Every few decades, they return. Just long enough to suggest intention, just brief enough to remain deniable. Some theorists now argue that the Black Night is not a single object, but rather a system, an ancient network of orbital devices designed to wake, transmit, and sleep on a schedule far removed from human time. A technology designed not to contact us, but to catalog us. We do not know what language it speaks. We do not know what it sees. But we know one thing: it is still speaking.
In the digital age, the Black Night legend did not disappear. It evolved. As governments and corporations launched thousands of satellites into orbit, amateur astronomers and independent researchers gained access to tools once reserved for defense agencies: star charts, orbital trackers, open-source radar arrays. And through this deluge of data, the pattern emerged once more. In 2001, a group of civilian satellite trackers operating out of Western Australia noticed an anomaly. A dark object, not listed in NORAD's satellite catalog, appeared briefly on their scopes. It followed a polar orbit, displayed no transponder signal, and tumbled in a manner inconsistent with active satellites. They tracked it for 2 nights. Then it vanished.
Similar sightings followed in Canada, Chile, and Finland. Each reported an unlisted object on a slow, high polar trajectory. The object appeared briefly, then dropped from view. When queried, official agencies either denied its existence or cited misidentified debris. Yet the coordinates were shared among tracking communities, and multiple observers confirmed its path. By 2006, forums on space surveillance were filled with threads discussing the ghost satellite, an object known only through its silences, its shadows. Users began to crowdsource data, building predictive models for when and where it might reappear. One of the most famous encounters came in 2010, when astrophotographer Pierre Delvaux captured a sequence of images showing a slowly rotating object glinting in infrared above the southern Atlantic. The object moved contrary to local orbital traffic and exhibited a reflective quality difficult to reconcile with known materials. He posted the images online. Within days, his website was taken down by a coordinated DDoS attack. The photos, however, had already spread. To this day, the object has not been positively identified. AI-assisted analysis of satellite photography has only deepened the mystery. In 2017, a Canadian research team developing object recognition software for tracking orbital debris noticed recurring anomalies, shapes that triggered the algorithm's non-natural flag. These shapes only appeared in specific orbits and only during brief windows of time. They dubbed them Observation Class Unknowns, OCUs. The classification was dismissed as a glitch, but the project's lead engineer, who later left the field, told an independent journalist that the objects showed up consistently at 10-year intervals, matching some of the LDE signal patterns documented in the 20th century. If true, it suggested that the Black Knight, or whatever it may be, does not simply drift. It activates, it transmits, it watches. Satellite experts argue that space is full of clutter: old rocket stages, defunct satellites, pieces of shattered payloads. But those fragments do not move in silence, reappear in rhythm, or resist decay for decades. Some things, in orbit, behave. And the data, when viewed not in pieces but as a pattern, suggests something beyond coincidence. Not one object, but a cycle. Not an accident, but a design.
Among the most controversial theories surrounding the Black Knight satellite is the notion that it represents not just technology, but intelligence, an active presence in orbit with the capability to observe, record, and perhaps even react. It is known simply as the intelligence hypothesis. First proposed in fringe aerospace journals during the 1980s, this theory suggests that the object, or objects, exhibiting the characteristics associated with the Black Knight are not passive relics. They are watchers, artificial probes placed deliberately in orbit to monitor Earth's development. Proponents point to the timing of the satellite's appearances, its alignment with major technological milestones, and the signals that sometimes precede or follow sightings. They argue that the object behaves as if governed by logic. It appears not continuously, but purposefully. In 1991, Dr. Jacques Vallée, a computer scientist and UFO researcher known for his cautious yet data-driven approach, wrote of non-human systems of observation embedded within our technological framework. Though he never directly referenced the Black Knight, many in the field believe this was an indirect allusion to orbital phenomena. Vallée's ideas paralleled those of earlier thinkers who believed Earth may be under long-term surveillance, not by hostile forces, but by patient observers cataloging our progress. In this view, the Black Knight is not unique, but merely the most visible node in a wider, hidden network. Support for the hypothesis also comes from declassified intelligence documents dating to the early days of satellite warfare. In a 1967 U.S. Department of Defense memorandum, partially redacted, strategists discussed the possibility of unregistered artificial objects acting as passive sensors or signal reflectors. Though the context relates to Soviet activity, one line stands out. At present, we lack sufficient tracking coverage to identify all orbital bodies with certainty. Unusual repeat orbits may signify non-terrestrial design. Most dismissed the phrase as Cold War paranoia, but others saw it as a breadcrumb, a quiet acknowledgement that not all objects in space were accounted for. In the 2000s, researchers at SETI began receiving narrowband signals of unexplained origin during radio telescope sweeps. While most of these were later identified as satellite interference, one signal, recorded in 2003, lasting approximately 4 minutes, did not match any known source. The team jokingly referred to it as nightfall. The data was archived and never officially followed up. A handful of theorists believe that if the Black Knight is an active probe, its function may be to remain hidden, to learn, not to interfere. This passive role echoes the zoo hypothesis, the idea that advanced civilizations deliberately avoid contact with less developed species, choosing instead to observe from afar. But if the Black Knight is watching, the question arises, who placed it there, and why? Speculations range from ancient alien civilizations to lost human precursors, technological societies that once reached space and left behind autonomous observers. There is no hard proof, only coincidence, only silence, only the sense that something sees more than we do. That we are not alone, not in the sense of contact, but in the sense of presence, a quiet intelligence in orbit, unblinking, waiting.
If the Black Knight satellite is real, if it exists beyond myth and misidentification, then it must have an origin, and here the mystery deepens. For some, its story does not begin in the 20th century, nor even the 19th with Tesla's experiments. They trace it back much further, into the forgotten folds of human history. Ancient astronaut theorists suggest that advanced visitors may have once come to Earth and left behind observation devices. These theorists often point to myths, symbols, and unexplained alignments in ancient architecture. But a lesser-known body of speculation suggests something quieter, that the Black Knight represents an artifact from a forgotten time, possibly not alien, but human. The idea of a pre-Ice Age civilization capable of advanced technology has gained cautious attention from alternative historians. They cite anomalous discoveries, precision-cut stone structures beneath the sea, unexplained maps showing Antarctica ice-free, and ancient legends that speak of sky people or machines that watched from above. One frequently cited example is the ancient Sanskrit epic, the Mahabharata, which describes flying machines called vimanas and celestial battles above the earth. Though often dismissed as allegory, some see these stories as fragments of a forgotten technological age. Could the Black Knight be a remnant of such a civilization? A probe launched before the last great cataclysm, before rising seas and time erased the evidence. Supporters of this theory argue that such a probe, designed for longevity, would require no radio signal, no constant fuel. It would need only a durable orbit and occasional brief transmissions. Its mission would be simple: to record, to remember, and perhaps to wait. Geological records show cyclical destruction on Earth, magnetic pole shifts, solar flares, asteroid impacts. A civilization capable of anticipating these cycles might have chosen to leave behind records in orbit, knowing the surface would not preserve them. In this framework, the Black Knight is not an alien artifact, but a human one, forgotten by its makers, mistaken by their descendants. A few scientists working quietly in the margins have considered this possibility. In 1994, a paper by orbital mechanics researcher Dr. Pavel Novikov examined the possibility of non-decaying passive satellites placed in stable polar orbits using gravitational tethers. His calculations showed that such devices, if constructed from specific alloys and deployed precisely, could remain in orbit for tens of thousands of years. His paper was never published in major journals, but it circulates still, passed between those who suspect the past holds more than we're told. To them,
The Black Knight is not science fiction. It is legacy. An echo of an age lost to fire, flood, and silence. A signal not from the stars, but from ourselves, before the forgetting. And if it is still there, still circling, then something of that ancient voice remains, high above us, beyond reach, watching a species that no longer remembers what it once was.
Where facts are absent, silence is telling. And in the case of the Black Knight satellite, silence has long been the official response. But occasionally, something slips through. An admission, a contradiction, a redaction too visible to ignore. From the earliest days of its appearance, official agencies have offered explanations, each one partial, each one narrowing the scope of inquiry without fully closing it. In 1960, the U.S. Department of Defense attributed the strange polar object to the casing of a Discoverer satellite. Yet internal memos showed disagreement among analysts. One document, marked confidential, questioned the size and trajectory of the object, noting it was inconsistent with known debris profiles. When the shuttle Endeavour captured photographs in 1998, NASA swiftly issued a statement, claiming the object was a lost thermal blanket. The explanation made headlines, but engineers familiar with the mission noted the object's trajectory did not match that of the dropped insulation. Independent image analysts reviewed the photos. They identified shadow angles and glints inconsistent with lightweight material. One even concluded that the object was rotating on multiple axes, a behavior unlikely for a sheet of foil adrift in vacuum. In subsequent missions, astronauts reported visual contacts with unidentified objects, often dismissed as ice crystals or space junk. But transcripts from STS-75 and STS-115 reveal moments of hesitation, brief mentions of objects that appeared and disappeared without explanation. Within the intelligence community, the phrase non-catalogued orbital artifact appears sporadically across decades of reports. These entries are never detailed, no mass, shape, or origin, just timestamps and coordinates, and a closing note, no further action. Whistleblowers and former contractors have told stories of systems that filter orbital anomalies before they reach public databases. An ex-NASA telemetry technician, speaking under pseudonym in 2014, claimed certain data streams were routed to classified endpoints before public release. Some things were flagged automatically, he said. We never knew what or why. And then there is the curious case of optical masking. Satellite imagery services often produce blacked-out or low-resolution patches in space maps, attributed to calibration errors. But some researchers, comparing historical imagery frames, have noticed recurring shadows in these gaps, objects that appear momentarily in one frame, then vanish. They do not resemble satellites. They do not resemble debris. Efforts to request clarification through Freedom of Information channels are typically met with long delays or heavily redacted returns. Entire paragraphs vanish under black ink. The reason given: national security. To believe in the Black Knight is to believe in a coordinated effort, not to suppress the truth, but to keep it undefined, to allow multiple theories to coexist, all plausible, all deniable. A strategy not of deception, but of diffusion, because some truths are more dangerous when believed than when doubted. And so, the silence remains. A story officially explained, and yet never fully closed.
So what are we left with when all the data is sifted, all the signals decoded, and all the photographs analyzed? A pattern, yes. A presence, perhaps. But most of all, a question that remains suspended in orbit, like the object itself. Is there a watcher above us? The Black Knight satellite, if real, does not announce itself. It does not beam propaganda. It does not land or threaten or speak. It simply drifts, dark, silent, persistent. And therein lies its power, not as a machine of contact, but as a machine of curiosity. It reflects back at us our own need to know, our hunger to explain what was never meant to be understood. Whether it is alien or ancient, passive or aware, the Black Knight remains a perfect enigma.
It is seen, and then it is not. It is photographed, and then denied. It is heard, and then forgotten. Yet it returns, over decades, through eras, as if following a path far older than human memory. Perhaps it is not a probe at all. Perhaps it is a mirror, one that shows us the limits of our sight, the fragility of our knowing. There are those who still listen, still scan the skies, still trace its orbit by starlight and signal. They do not claim to know what it is. They claim only that it returns. And that is enough. In a universe of silence, the black night whispers. In a sky of noise, it remains precise. Not a myth, not a certainty, something between. A watcher, a relic, a riddle that circles endlessly above us, waiting. And if one night, as the static hisses and the skies shift, you feel the cold pull of a shadow moving overhead, look up, not in fear, but in wonder, because something is still there, something that has always been there, watching a planet that long ago forgot how to watch back.